Scenes of devastation unfolding right now in Turkey and Syria after what's being called one of the most powerful earthquakes to hit the region in a century. More than 1,600 people were killed and thousands were injured when the massive quake struck Turkey's Gaziantep province early on Monday morning. And with an unknown number of people still buried beneath the rubble, that number could rise dramatically.
We do not know how far the number of dead and injured will rise, as debris removal works continue in many buildings in the quake zone. Our hope is that we will recover from this disaster with the least loss of life.
Rescue workers frantically searching for survivors in bitterly cold temperatures. But even as they do, major aftershocks are rocking the area. CNN's Scott McLean is following developments, joins us here in London with the latest on that. And these aftershocks are massive, aren't they?
Yeah, the number of challenges here for rescue workers, Max, just continues to multiply, really. These aftershocks, under any other circumstance, had there not have been a 7.8 overnight, you would call them massive earthquakes on their own. So you had the 7.8, which happened after 4 o'clock in the morning, and then just about 2.5 hours ago or so, you had another major aftershock that was a 7.5. And just to put that into context, that is the strongest earthquake, stronger even than the last really substantial earthquake in Turkey, which was 1999. That was a 7.4, and that one killed 17,000 people, left 500,000 people homeless. So it just gives you a sense of what we're up against as these rescue workers are battling not only the constant tremors and smaller earthquakes, but also the risk of major aftershocks like this one, plus the cold weather, plus the snow. I just want to show you a piece of video that we've gotten in not long ago from Malatya. This was from the most recent aftershock there. This is a reporter with a Turkish channel called A News, live on air when it seems like clearly they realize that there's more shaking. They hear the sounds and then start running. So I'll play the piece of video and then I'll translate what the reporter says. Watch.
Güvenli alana geçiyoruz bizler şu anda. Vatandaşları da görüyorsunuz. Deprem oluyor gene. Evet, şu an Kaz'da arama kurtarma çalışmalarına doğru giderken.
The sounds there, Max, are absolutely terrifying there. So the reporter here is saying, as we were heading to the rubble to film search and rescue efforts, there were 2 consecutive aftershocks with a loud noise, and the building you are seeing on my left was brought down to earth. There's lots of dust. This local resident here, he is covered in dust. Some really terrifying scenes. And we also have updates on the number of killed and injured. More than 1,000 now in Turkey alone who have been killed, according to the authorities. More than 2,800 buildings have been demolished, have collapsed. So you imagine what happened there. You imagine at each one of these sites that we're seeing the pictures of, multiply that by 2,800, and you can imagine what potentially the death toll is going to be here, especially since this earthquake, the initial one, took place overnight. There are more than 7,000 injured, but President Erdogan made clear earlier today that they simply don't know how many people may still be trapped underneath of the rubble. Obviously, there is aid coming in from around the world, rescue workers from around the world, around the country to try to get there. But these things take time, and with these really bitterly cold temperatures, nothing can happen quickly enough, given that, of course, it would be extremely difficult for someone to survive underneath the rubble, very likely badly injured in these kind of temperatures, which are right around freezing for significant periods of time, Max.
I've just seen that the UK has been asked by the Turkish government for search and rescue teams, and they're sending 76 personnel apparently, but they're particularly looking for seismic listening devices, concrete cutting and braking equipment. This is a sort of kit that they need in the next, few hours, really, don't they, in order to get those people from out under the rubble.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And even when it comes to more basic things like that, like just heavy machinery to try to pick through some of the debris, if in fact there is someone trapped that maybe they can get to, These things are readily available in big cities like Gaziantep, which, by the way, has the highest death toll right now, more than 200 people killed, or at least 200 people killed, I should say. But one of the concerns is that a lot of this equipment perhaps isn't found as readily available in some of these smaller towns and villages closer to the epicenters, where perhaps the search and rescue efforts are much more rudimentary than they are in the big cities. Now, hopefully a lot of these towns and villages don't have the kind of high rises that we have in some of the bigger cities. But remember, 1999 was a real wake-up call for Turkey, and that's when they started to really get smart on building codes and make sure that any new builds were according to sort of earthquake-proofing standards. But in these smaller towns and villages where you have older buildings, perhaps not up to the same kind of codes, that's where there's plenty of concern that the death toll could be even higher, and we just simply don't know about it yet because the mobile connectivity out there is not great at the moment, Max.
Okay, Scott, thank you. In Syria, officials say at least 592 people have died in the quake. Syria's state news agency says most of the damage and deaths were in and around Aleppo, near Syria's northern border with Turkey. There are also casualties reported in opposition-held territory in Syria's northwest. Rescue crews across the region are desperately trying to search or reach those stuck under the rubble of fallen buildings. Earlier, they managed to pull this young boy out from the rubble in the city of Idlib. Salma's been monitoring all of the Syrian movements, and well, sadly, they've got experience of this, haven't they? Groups like the White Helmets know exactly what they're doing in these situations.
This is an absolutely catastrophic event for a country that's already been devastated by more than a decade of war, Max. You heard there from my colleague Scott about how Turkish authorities have really been preparing for a huge earthquake now for nearly 2 decades. They are trying to bring up building codes. They are trying to make sure that people are safe. In Syria, the exact opposite has been happening. There's been a civil war that's literally rattled the country, destroyed its infrastructure, targeted hospitals and clinics. And you have to remember that the civil conflict is very much playing out here on the ground as this earthquake happens. In its aftermath, you have 2 different authorities on the ground. You have the regime-controlled areas, the government-controlled areas. They're receiving help, of course, from Damascus. And then you have the rebel-held areas in the north, like places like Idlib, where they're entirely reliant on rebel forces providing help, on volunteers like the White Helmets to pull people out from under the rebel. But these volunteers, Max, they themselves need help. One of them made an appeal as White Helmet rescue workers were trying to pull people out of the rubble. Take a listen.
It's a very difficult task for us. We need help. We need the international community to do something to help us, to support us. Northwest Syria now, it's a disaster area. We need help from everyone to save our people.
You can hear the emotion in his voice there, Max. It's absolutely a desperate and devastating situation for a Syrian community that's been traumatized, as I mentioned, by this conflict. Many people were waking up wondering if it was warplanes when it really was an earthquake. And now you have more aftershocks coming, again, for these traumatized children living in these areas with very little resources, very little help. I know we have images to show you of the hospitals that are absolutely overwhelmed. We saw pictures on social media of the dead literally lying on the floor of hospitals bleeding out, untreated, because there is no care to give them. Body bags piling up again in these clinics. And you heard there again from my colleague Scott how the international community is already offering help to Turkey, already trying to bring the equipment they need. It will not be the same case for Syria. There is simply not the access there. You have to remember Damascus, that government is sanctioned by the West because of its involvement in this conflict. So there will be no direct line of communication. There will be nobody from the White House picking up the phone and asking President Bashar al-Assad what he needs. This will very much be dependent on the people living there, relying on themselves, and these aftershocks coming one after another in this already devastated area. And even north of that border, inside Turkey, you're talking about millions of Syrian refugees living there. This was supposed to be their safe space, Max, and it absolutely is devastating.